Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. We are kicking things off with this wonderful new year, the Divine 2020 Critical Success, and we are going to start things off with, well, first an update. We are moved, if not all the way unpacked. I've got the least and most important parts of moving already set up and ready to go. But, as you can see, well, there's just so much more to get through and get done. This is just in this back game room here. This isn't even the rest of the house. The only thing more set up is, thankfully, our bedroom. But, well, as you know, as probably all of you know by now, moving just sucks. But we're getting it done. We're going to start off the new year right by settling in and hopefully not moving again for another 3 or 4 years. But I'd be remiss, both as your storyteller extraordinaire and master of lore, if I didn't bring you some level of content here. And I thought I'd start the new year off right by bringing you Tales from the Table. And tonight we are going to be starting off with, well, it's a story I've referenced and used as an example and talked about through a couple of different other episodes already. But it's on the night where I just had the biggest friggin' facepalm ever, followed up with one of the coolest, greatest moments I've ever had as a DM doing any sort of storytelling for any system. But I thought I'd try to go into a little bit more detail on it. So, here we go. It was a 3.5 adventure before we'd ended up upgrading and converting over to Pathfinder. Now, the players were going out to the Berman Township in the Anarian Wastes surrounding the City of Mages, Rashman. Now, the Wasteland is not a naturally occurring event. It's only been around about 1,500 years or so, and it was caused by the arcane destruction of the previous city where Rashman now stands. And the Berman Township has sprung up around one of the many little oases that have come about in the 1,000 years or so since the destruction. And the city of Mages has sent people out to settle these areas, and they've hired and employed druids and so many different farmers, people with knowledge of how to coax the soil into new life, growing new crops, making the ground fertile once again, hoping to one day restore the region back to more of its temperate setting, or the temperate kind of region that it should be, with all kinds of trees and grasses, shrubbery, animal life, all the usual happy, goodly, druidic things. Anyways, they're sent out to this oasis village because there's been a number of murders. A series of prominent locals had been picked off. And not only that, but there are raiders running around in the wastes too, disrupting caravans and essentially cutting off the town from support. So, the city hired these adventurers and sent them out to deal with the raiders and try to solve the murders, and it was suspected that the two were linked. Well, the players found that this was very much the case. The mayor was less than welcoming, even though that the captain of the guard for this town was initially receptive to having help. The mayor didn't want unknown outside elements involved in anything. He didn't want to deal with those whose loyalties could shift on a dime, and was more interested in just paying them and sending them on their way, just to keep them out of town. A ransom, he called it. The players, though, although happy to try and accept the money if they could, believing that they found the mayor's behavior suspicious, and not only that, but other members of the other leaders, figureheads, pillars of the community didn't want the players around either. Strange, they thought. So, they began investigating, and they found suspicious activity amongst the town's leadership, but a more prominent threat was obviously the raiders. So after fending off a couple of raider attacks and an attempted assassination, they decided to go out into the wastes and find where the raiders were located, and they tracked them down to this hidden cave system buried out in the dunes, and they worked their way through, and they had help from an NPC cleric. This NPC cleric came along because the original cleric Dolinar, Cleric of Pelor, his player couldn't show up for several months. It was almost 6 months. So I gave them a Cleric NPC to help them out. And as they work their way through, they found that they've ended up creating many of these different situations where enemies ended up confused or attacking each other, led them into their own traps. All kinds of clever little gameplay and gimmicks on their part. For the most part, anyways. And especially working with this NPC cleric who, she's only an acolyte, but she was just really quick to use her wand of Cure Light Wounds and start touching up the players and making sure that the characters were going to stay upright and stay active and capable of being in the fight for longer stretches of time. Everything went great. And then, after dealing with the raiders, or at least the raider camp, the rest of the marauding band ended up having to abandon the site, and did so. They didn't worry about coming back because the players are more well and ready and prepared for them, and had laid their own traps in order to deal with the larger numbers. So the raiders, being more clever than the players had realized, abandoned the site. And as they investigated and dug through everything they could, they found that this wasn't just a band of raiders, but a cult of the six-fingered hand, the blackened hand, a cult of Graz, demon lord of lust, pleasure, and perversions. All sorts of unsavory things. And not only that, but he's a demon prince in the realms of the abyss. So they continue on with their investigation, realize, if these raiders have abandoned their camp, maybe they're going on to just outright attack the town, sack the village, and all that nonsense. So they make their way back, and they find that martial law has been declared in town, and the players have been branded as dissident elements. Not only that, but anybody else who does not go along in supporting martial law with totalitarian control for the mayor is clearly against them as well, and should be dealt with swiftly and harshly, rather. Don't need to add anything else to that. And the players realize, there's much more going on here, and so they decide to split up. They some of them take refuge in a small shrine hidden away in some of the hidden alcoves behind the bookshelves for this particular shrine. I believe it was a shrine to Cord, god of strength and the like. I won't go into the reasons why they're there, but they hide out in the shrine while one of the players goes and tries to get some kind of help, reach out to one of the more sensible members of the community, and he goes to the White Tower Moneylenders, pawn shop and money lending place, and it's run by this dwarf named Durgaden. And the player speaks with them and just is trying to appeal towards his decency and say, look, we don't like each other, but what's happening in this town is wrong, and something worse is about to come barreling down through the streets. The raiders are going to be attacking any moment. We need to work together and at least deal with them. Then we can sort out our own differences. Well, the dwarf agreed, and then as soon as the player had his back turned, grabbed up a spear and stabbed him in the back, and revealed that he was a high priest to the cult of Mammon. It was one of those little, over the course of the adventure, they'd found clues that there may have been another group, and they suspected, but they weren't exactly sure. The group had ended up missing quite a few bits of information, but once it was revealed, those things all kind of clicked into place for them. So they go, oh, shit. And not only that, but they just found the high priest. And it was one of 2 boss encounters I had planned out, and this player was stuck alone with him. Well, with a series of critical successes, he actually managed to get away from him. But he was definitely bloodied real good and just had to get healing. But the acolyte had been kidnapped, and they needed to find their friend. So they gathered up, they got what healing they could from the person that was tending the shrine to Cord, and as they left to go back to the pawn shop to try to find their way into the into the cult's hidden temple beneath it, they see this dome of purple arcane energy descend over the temple to Pelor in the area where the acolyte who'd been helping them was from. And they go, oh, that's arcane energy. That's not divine energy. Oh, that can't be good. But we got to deal with this other cult first. Too many cults to deal with. Too many enemies on all sides. And as they try to avoid these mobs of townsfolk that are patrolling through the streets, brandishing spears, pitchforks, torches, marching lockstep with the town guard, they make their way to the temple, and that they find that the temple has already been attacked. And this is where the raiders had gone. They didn't sack the rest of the town. They made a beeline straight for the temple and had just worked their way through slaughtering everyone. So they're fighting members of both cults as they make their way through. And they find their friend Dolinar, Cleric of Pelor, a servant of the light, holy healer, and destroyer of the undead. And they find Durgadan, the high priest, bloodied, still missing definitely missing some spells at this point. And the group fights him, and they manage to put him down rather quickly. And, they find that he's in service to the cult of Mammon, Devil Lord of Greed. Hence why these two cults are clashing together. It's because, well, for those of you that don't know the difference, devils and demons are fundamentally different creatures. One's from hell, the other one's from the abyss. Hell is lawful evil. The abyss is chaotic evil. And they've been at loggerheads since before time even existed as a concept. Before numbers really even came into existence. The gods created angels. Angels fell in the course of fighting the demons. We can get into the lore around the blood war later. But suffice it to say, that's what's happening here. The blood war spilled out onto the material plane, and the different factions are duking it out in the streets of the Berman Township. And now, one of the cults has just been annihilated with the fall of Durgadan, the high priest for the cult of Mammon in this little town. So, they decide, okay, now we need to go deal with whatever's happening at the Church of Pelor. That's probably where the cult went to next. Wipe out all the divine competition in the area, then loot and sack the place. Rather cunning plan, they thought. And as they arrive there, they realize they hear screams and fighting all around the temple. And they go, oh no, we gotta hurry. So they book it through the streets as fast as they can. Not even worrying about patrols at this point. Not realizing that the patrols are thinner. Not only that, but people are fleeing away. And as they arrive, they see a bunch of makeshift barricades that have been set up around the temple, on the outside of where the dome used to be. And they find that the township, the townsfolk, the town guard, they were preparing to lay siege. And then these strange, rotting creatures had just overtaken them. There's signs of fighting, blood everywhere, bodies, and all these creatures were hunched over, just mowing down on all this dead flesh. And these undead creatures spotted the party, and so combat started, and they carved their way through these creatures rather easily. Combat went really well for them at this point. And so after they finish, I let them make their knowledge checks, arcane lore or knowledge religion. Any of these things would have worked. Well, the wizard failed his knowledge arcana check. Absolutely failed, and the rest of the party wasn't really concerned about it because they didn't have those skills. They just started looting the town guard and the townsfolk for whatever supplies they could scavenge together. And then it came to Dolinar, servant of the light, destroyer of the undead, bringer of health, healing, happiness, and joy, and all these other warm, fuzzy things, with the destruction of the undead, I will reiterate. And he makes his knowledge religion check, and it's a 20. Rolls a 20 right there for the skill check, and altogether it's a total going over 30. It's like, you know exactly what these creatures are. These are ghouls. And ghouls are definitely undead. They have a stench about them that can leave you sickened. Claw attacks and bite attacks will leave you paralyzed. And most importantly, these creatures have a low kind of cunning to them, floating somewhere around of intelligence of 3 to 5-ish or so. And any living being they kill will turn into an undead creature. And the player looks at me and goes, okay, You know that these creatures had killed the townsfolk and town's guard. Yes. So you can tell by the way your friends, your comrades, your allies, your brothers in arms are acting right now as they dig through all these dead bodies that they have no idea that these were ghouls and that these bodies are going to get up soon. All right. Do you want to do anything with this information? Do you want to say anything? And he just looks at me. You get to roll for initiative against the ghouls as these bodies get up, freshly reanimated and created ghouls. The rest of you are caught by surprise. And I should mention, as I'm doing this, at about that pace and level of description, almost verbatim, word for word, all of that happened, the players are going, "Come on, buddy. He's being really nice right now." And it just failed. We all facepalmed, but him. He just did not get it for some reason. I was being extra nice. Like, I sat there like, you can't do. What happened? How did you catch such a sudden case of the stupid right now? Well, there was mass panic amongst the party at that point as the ghouls start getting up. Granted, they're in a prone position, but they're still attacking from prone against flat-footed opponents. So, I more or less thought it worked out, and the party agreed, yeah, no, this makes sense. They're clawing, they're biting, they're grabbing and grappling. That makes sense. And so the wizard just panicked when his turn came around. Forgot that Burning Hands has no friendly fire discrimination or anything like that. So as he threw Burning Hands down at his feet, he successfully immolated the ghouls, and they failed their reflex saves because, they're prone and grappling him. But he also caught fire too and dropped down below 0 hit points and was also on fire. So that wasn't good. Dolinar, I should mention, rolled last for his initiative turn against all the ghouls, and the 3 ghouls attacking him managed to keep him paralyzed the entire fight. So this divine, holy priest of the light, charged with the destruction of the undead foe, these abominations of life, these corruptions of everything sacred to the Church of Pelor, was rendered useless and ineffective for 5 rounds of combat at the hands of freaking ghouls. Ghouls that he had successfully identified. No turn undead, no smiting, no. Well, clerics can't exactly smite, but you get the idea. He couldn't bring holy wrath down to bear upon their undead heads. So that was great. They barely managed to survive what should have been a really easy encounter. It was supposed to be this gruesome process of them, removing the heads, destroying the brains, your classic zombie destruction tropes. And maybe having 1 or 2 of the ghouls get up before they could really effectively, get through everything. But no, they had to fight through everything and burn up almost all of their resources. So, and well, we still had a couple hours to go in our game time, and they were near the end of the session, and they decided to keep going. They used up the last of their healing to bring the wizard back and keep him alive, and they had to heal Dolinar. And then they worked their way into the temple, and they realized the undead had swarmed out of the Temple of Pelor, which, if you've been paying attention, you're like, oh god, that can't be good. And they go in there, and they find that the faithful who'd taken shelter in the temple, not wanting to join the rest of the townsfolk in their authoritarian fervor and their panic, had all been slaughtered, the pews all smashed, people dangling from chandeliers and the sconces for the torches, and they find several of the other acolytes maddened and crazed with bloodlust, just scars. Well, not even scars, just fresh wounds dripping blood from what turned out to be strange sigils that had been carved into their flesh and bones, wearing bronze masks. They had to fight through all of this, working their way down into the catacombs, and finally finding the local bishop. And they also, when they enter the final chamber, they see that in one hand he has his mace, and in the other he's got a chain leading around, wrapped around the neck of the acolyte that had been helping them this entire time. And that's when I let the party make will saves. Now the fighter had to get worst of it, and I'll explain why about that in a moment. But they realize, as half the party makes their will saves, that the illusion melts away, and the acolyte is actually a succubus. And it's not a chain, but her hand with her wand of cure light wounds just reaching over towards the archbishop and is channeling, well, protective magics into him. Whatever protective magics she can throw down. And everything just clicked for them in an instant as they realized all those moments where opponents had gotten confused and attacked each other were because she was using her charm abilities, her innate abilities as a succubus, as a demon, to get them to attack each other, to lull them into this sense of confusion. The players had thought it was all them, and some of it was, but they had also created conditions where she could use these magics without anybody spotting her. Lots of billowing clouds of smoke, lots of barriers that kept them from seeing all events as they unfolded. So they realized, oh, this is how the cult has been spreading. This succubus has been moving about within the church, has been converting people, has converted the bishop and caused him to fall away from the path of righteousness, and now they have to deal with this. So, as they go through the fight, half the party doesn't even realize she's actually not the big threat, but definitely a threat that needs to be dealt with. And the fighter in particular, because they developed a little bit of a relationship. He was part of a caravan that had been recently wiped out. He was a latecomer to the game. And to explain how he arrived in town, well, his family's caravan was destroyed, annihilated by the cult. And so she used his vulnerability as the opportunity to work her way in and sink her claws into him. And after, a night or two of romance and passion, rather than having, this level 6 character lose levels, I decided she's going to weave deeper, stronger, more ironclad enchantments around his mind and heart. And so he had a higher will save to overcome, and those of you who have played fighters know they don't get squat for will saves. So I didn't make it impossible for him, but I made it difficult, and anytime one of the other players attacked her, she would use a free action to look at him and go, "Why are you letting your friends hurt me? Save me." And so he would, if he was close enough, he'd jump in the way or grapple them and stop them from attacking her. And it took about 7 rounds into the fight for him to finally snap out of it and realize what had happened. Absolutely incredible moment of gameplay and role-playing with the player as he's given this cold iron longsword. And it's enchanted to be a holy weapon temporarily, as he goes toe-to-toe, one-on-one with the succubus and finally manages to behead her. And then they deal with the fallen bishop, and they completely wipe everything out. They literally had no spells left. They had 2 potions of healing left between them. They had no abilities left. Even the archer character, a scout if I remember right, was out of arrows and had actually taken to using his bow to bludgeon the priest with. He had a short sword, but that got sundered by the priest actually. So he just had to keep beating on the priest with his long bow. But that was just one of the greatest moments for me right there. Was that moment when the players realized, oh shit, this is how the cult's been keeping track of us. And the cult didn't kidnap her. she left with them. They made it look like a kidnapping, but that's why she wasn't really fighting all that hard. That's why she wasn't channeling divine magic to heal us. She kept using her wand because she had no divine magic to use, just her various charm abilities and suggestion and the like. Absolutely incredible moment for me. But this is just but one of many tales from the table, and I hope to bring you all many more. This week, I'm hoping to resume and maybe even finish the Putting It All Together series, as well as continuing on with other editions of the Player's Guide. Sadly, nobody has voted yet on what class to cover next, so I may just have to take it upon myself to decide that all on my lonesome. But if anybody does have any suggestions, ideas, or wants to comment on what they would like to see me cover as part of the Player's Guide, well, just let me know in the comments down below. With that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your Master of Lore and Storyteller Extraordinaire. Thank you all for your time. Have yourselves a good night this new year. Let's make 2020 a critical success, shall we?